bring that demand down to 1, because 1 for Ottawa may be welcome on a day like this, but it would be 7 in Africa. I mean, it's sort of that extreme, a difference in the differential impact. So that gives you a little bit of a rundown. But others, I mean, we've got Ian from climateandcapitalism.com. You know these CJ movements. Did I say that correctly? Or
very good.
There's some others too.
You got some in there I'd forgotten. That's true.
Okay. Others want to add to this list so I can make it better? I know Nigerians have a thing or two to say about climate and oil. And are there none of the Nigerians I was hoping to? Okay. Others from the continent that have your own impressions of these struggles? In Joburg, if you do come through there, Earthlife Africa has been our leading CJ force, doing especially protests against Sasol, it's the single biggest source of emissions in the world, and ESCOM. Cape Town will now especially take on anti-nuke, so that's going to be part of the repertoire as well. Nuclear, like carbon trading or carbon capture and storage or biofuels or dropping iron filings in the ocean, is a false solution. So you're going to see, I think, lots of very good watchdogging from CJ activists, and the Climate Justice South Africa is a very strong group. And I think an alternative summit, did anybody go to Copenhagen? Because there you would have probably seen the Klima Forum, which was kind of all in. The public must come and get educated, and climate justice and the Climate Action Network, everybody together to sort of work through. And we probably will do that, perhaps at our university or Durban University of Technology. So November 28 to December 9, you'll be there in person, some of you, I hope. And if not, you'll probably find some way of offering solidarity so that Canada doesn't continue to play the role of saboteur of the climate deal. Please, and what's your name?
My name is Wangui, and you've been praising Kenya, so I'll say I'm from Kenya. My question is there a way to, in climate justice, include the banning of toxic waste? For example, I'm not sure if any of you know, but recently in Ivory Coast, in the center, in Abidjan, and in a neighborhood, over 100 people died when a Dutch company dumped toxic waste that came about from the cleaning of oil in when that was dumped, of course, with participation from some politicians, but when that was dumped in the center of the city. Also in Somalia, along the coast, there's lots of people, lots of companies dumping waste along the coastline because it's supposedly an anarchy. So is there a way to include in climate justice the action to really condemn and prevent this kind of toxic racism, as you said?
It's such a good question, because we have to see in climate all the issues. I mean, really, so many come together and allow people who are specialists in their own fields or own geographical areas, or specialists in toxics trade, to come out and join a broader crowd to connect the dots and link them up. Yeah, if we don't have a Somali pirate chapter of the global CJ movement, I think you're right, we should, because one of the things that got them going, as Johan Harris reported, I think some of you may have seen in The Guardian, was indeed this appalling record of northern dumping of toxics off the coast. And we know the Cote d'Ivoire case, at least was prosecuted, or is being prosecuted. It hasn't come out in any final form, but there is a Basel Convention against doing this stuff. But I asked you before, have we got anything that's working? Mm-hmm. And I don't think, frankly, Basel has worked. Mm-hmm. And there are persistent organic pollutant bans. Some of you from South Africa know we violate them. We call it DDT to stop malaria. So we really have major problems with getting a big global process, which we need for this. Mm-hmm. And hence it's going to be up to, if not Somali pirates, at least some other civil society activists to do the watchdogging, to bring this argument. I think the biggest problem with the Basel Convention against toxics is that it just looks at the symptom, the trade. And let's ask, why are we producing the toxics? Mm-hmm. And our group there in Berkeley, I work with the Story of Stuff, has really been asking that, I think, quite effectively. I wonder if others of you have seen it. So there are lots of ways through storyofstuff.org you can tap into movements. The last film before last was the story of electronics, and it went through like this damn computer, right? I mean, it's about to fall apart. And I'll go and get another one. And I'm sure you endorse that, but what do I do with this one? Well, there's so many toxics in here, and the electronics E-dumping in Africa is a big problem. So yeah, we really have to have system solutions to these. So that's one of the sources that might be interesting, storyofstuff.org. And if you have any comments on our video, that would be great too. Okay, great. Anesh, you have a point too? Yeah, great. Tell us your name, please.
My name's Tasha. I was just wondering, because you kind of alluded to this, but I know like in Cancun, there was definitely starting to be, there were several different outside spaces, and there's a Gay Campesina space, there was another outside space, and then there are the folks from the Inside, and there were groups like Indigenous Environmental Network and the CJN Network were definitely kind of in both of those spaces. I'm just wondering your insights as to what you think the feeling in terms of the inside-outside strategy is going to be like in Durban, and where a lot of the climate justice activists are going to be situated, and to what, like, there definitely have been conversations about why are we legitimizing the UN process at all, why are we inside, and like just your take on that and what you think it's going to be.
Well, I do have another slide for you, and I don't want the commissioner and our fabulous staff to get too worried, but there's already a map of where the action is going to be. Not that this is the final map. The final map, I don't think any of us will see. I will email it to you. But part of the action occurs in a convention center where in 2001 there was a big protest, and there were about 50,000 people, 10,000, whatever it was, really nearly at the edge. And two very, very extraordinary revolutionaries, Dennis Brutus and Fatima Mir, nearly took that group into the ICC. So they've got lots better security since then. Those two revolutionaries said, next time. Don't improve, next time. And so it's nearly next time, although there have been other incidents at the ICC in the city center. This should be a big one. There is an interesting debate about whether a traditional march through town in Durban on the December 3rd classic kind of day of halfway through a big march. Copenhagen had 100,000. The one I was at in Cancun, probably 5,000, because exactly, you're right, lots of fragmentation, political and geographical. So no matter how many people come, should this be a march to the elites in, maybe I could be a little risque and say, our typical abused spouse manner, asking, pleading our spouse not to beat us, and making all the arguments and asking them to seal the deal and all of that. And then they do beat us, and they don't do the deal, and then we get really angry and upset, we whine a lot, and then we're demobilized, and then we come back again. Next year, do the same thing. Next year after this, it'll be sold. Do we want to have another conference hall as CJ activists in that mode? Most people say no, and maybe instead of just a little march to ICC, if the situation is as dire as I'm suggesting, because of the global balance of forces is so adverse, and if the only work that's going on the climate that's making a dent is coming from grassroots CJ activists like the ones I listed, why don't we walk away, some say, from the ICC to the beach? The going away party, the beach is going to go away, climate change the water. And that would be a very interesting place to do much better, happier, and more committed, and maybe more militant strategizing about the kinds of direct actions in places like South Durban. Again, please close your ears for a minute, our dear colleagues from the High Commission. This is the most notorious petrochemical complex south of the Niger Delta and deserves to be shut down. I don't think there's any debate about that amongst any serious environmentalists. And there have been big marches, thousands in South Durban, about 15 minutes away from the action. Whether there should be a Klima forum that does all of this big civil society all in, or something more, if you were in Copenhagen, Christiania is a debate, but we may have one university or another as that sort of alternative summit. All of this is going on now as a debate, a group called the C17 of civil society that includes CJN, CAN. So it's an ongoing discussion about what would work. And your inputs, already I've been hearing inputs in Ottawa the last couple of days have been so valuable. Anything you have to help us. Three of our groups, Groundwork is the Friends of the Earth, SETSI, our center, are part of this, but we think there will be a series, not of fragmented, but of diverse reality tour experiences, like I showed you our dump, like SETSI, all kinds of interesting. We have a Faith Justice Center, Diaconia, that's exceptionally good for bringing progressives and churches together. So I think it's going to be extraordinary, but I'm a bit biased. If you have advice, some of the Canadian advisors to this crowd got very excited in Dakar, Senegal, and for all the wrong reasons. And one of the reasons was because president with some neoliberal tendencies, after the while about it, told a university vice chancellor that he didn't want to see 20,000 hippies and lefties come and mix with the students. So what our friends in Dakar thought was a red carpet to join the World Social Forum at the biggest university in West Africa where the elites are reproduced, actually was a disinvitation. And so the first 2 days of the WSF, you may have heard, were chaos. So there was another lesson from Dakar for those of us who think universities are safe spaces. They don't always. And I think these are the things when the Canadians, okay, let me be frank, Naomi and Avi and all these, and they were saying, well, one thing you want from Canada is people who will save the climate. Do you want government officials from Canada? Do you want the officials of Environment Canada or the minerals ministries that are really the power brokers or a certain prime minister, no matter who it will be in November? Or should they actually be encouraged to just stay home and not sabotage? Should the Washington elites like Robert Zoellick and Todd Stern and Jonathan Pershing and Barack Obama just stay home so we can get on with a real climate deal? And that way we don't have to call this the conference of polluters. If you have other thoughts on what we need to be doing and bringing from your experiences, we'd love to hear them. But we can do that after a beer afterwards too. Other thoughts?
Can I, sorry, I should be actually filming this and not talking, but I just have another question. Just thinking about my experiences in Kenya and in not many, but one marginalized community in particular, and just thinking about the violence of everyday life for people who live in these communities. How do you contextualize climate justice when they've never had water? So you're telling them, okay, well, if we solve the environment and stop corporate control and corporate destruction of the world, then you'll have running water. But how do you contribute to engendering a motivation for that when there's no running water? There's never been running water, so you can't say, okay, well, if climate justice happens, then you'll have running water. Or you can't say, for people who've lived in close to the biggest garbage dump in the world, that's what they've grown up with, so they can't envision a difference. So how do all these organizations that you've talked about, what strategies do they use to navigate those situations?
Well, yeah, in other words, can one go beyond particularism of your life and your locale into a broader metropolitan or regional or national as a crucial scale? We saw from North Africa people who we hadn't expected to be deep Democrats suddenly risking their lives for getting rid of one dictator after the other. So we see enormous resources to envisage change at the appropriate scale. I think one of the answers comes from a politics that isn't necessarily about charity from the North and aid to solve problems like lack of running water, but a reparations sensibility. And I think that has emerged a little bit here and there in the African continent, enough that 10 years ago at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, there was push by some African elites to say, well, actually we are set back by the systematic looting. It was slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and let's be frank, let's add the resource curse and the extraction of non-renewable, even the World Bank's conceding these basic facts. So where would a vehicle for repaying poor people in Africa for being looted most appropriately lie? Would a Trevor Manuel as a chair, perhaps in a month, of a green climate fund, open up space for that discussion? We're not sure. In Cancun, one of the ways it was phrased was direct access. Do we want Meles Zenawi, quite the tyrant, killed lots of students who didn't like his dictatorship, but he's the real leader of Africa on climate debt? Or should that be invested in the kinds of movements from below? And what would they say? One of the demands is certainly quite strong in South Africa and Namibia, is that those resources shouldn't flow like the G8 money did through venal dictators and elites, through aid agencies that are corrupted in their own kinds of ways, even in Ottawa, and corporations that are tied in, and local cronies. But they should be given directly in a basic income grant, a basic income grant that would go to everybody in these affected areas. The pilot that's worked extremely well by all accounts. I mean, Der Spiegel, a German magazine, actually was praising it